Hello, and welcome to this introduction to SEO. This is a brief overview of what's important in SEO. SEO is a discipline like many others. However, SEO has at its core simply an understanding of the way that search engines understand and analyze documents on the web. So SEO is all about understanding Bing and Google and Yandex and Baidu and Naver and all the other search engines. Google themselves have steadily worked towards better matching searcher intent, but it also relies on websites doing the same. You've got to deliver the content that people are looking for, and that means matching what searchers are looking for with what you're writing on your website. Understanding that searchers want to know, are scented candles toxic, which has fewer competitors than are scented candles safe, in addition to having higher search volume, can help grab valuable visibility and potentially convert later. I know what you're thinking. It's negative. Are scented candles toxic is negative. Are scented candles safe is at least neutral. So shouldn't you be writing it that way? Well, look at the numbers. This is a tool called SEMrush, SEMrush. Other tools are available, but I used this one. You can see in here that it's very clear that people are looking for, are scented candles toxic much more frequently on a monthly basis than are scented candles safe. So what are you going to write? You're going to write, are scented candles toxic, because there are fewer people writing about that and more people looking for it. It makes sense. Search engines run everything that they find that is deemed worthy to be returned through a search result through an algorithm. Now, not everything is deemed worthy to be returned through a search result. So there's the corpus of the web as Google knows it, and then there's the corpus of what actually gets returned in the search results, and those are two different things. So you may actually be, Google may be aware of your web page, but you're not actually in the search returnable index. The algorithm itself is what determines what's in that search returnable index is displayed for any searcher's query, and then also how they are sorted. So the algorithm contextualizes relevancy of the content that it holds to the search that the user makes. And then it ranks those results based on mathematical relationships and also machine learning. So an engineer can no longer tell you why something ranked where it did, because it's part people, part math. Search engine algorithms are extremely complex and make use of hundreds of so-called ranking factors, but these ranking factors break down into three pillars, and that's why this picture's on this slide. Makes sense now. The three pillars are technical SEO, content SEO, and links. So now it all makes sense. Technical SEO can mean the difference between a website ranking well and not ranking at all. It is the process of optimizing the code and site structure for search engines, but that does not mean removing spaces and minifying things. It's much more complex than that. If technical aspects of a website have not been optimized, it may not be possible for the spiders or bots or whatever you want to call them to index the pages. If a website has indexing issues, no amount of quality on-page content or good links will help. Technical implementation decisions are often left to developers who may not fully understand the SEO implications of their site architecture and development decisions. I'm working on a site like that right now. Some decisions the devs took on their own have had a negative impact on the SEO. So now we have a brand new website that's gone live that is actually harming based on SEO signals. So you really need to take control of decisions like that and not let devs just make them on their own. There are some things that you can do to help with more common issues that we find, especially in retail. For example, canonicalization is where we tell Google, or any search engine really, what the correct URL is for where additional elements might be added to a URL, which makes it seem unique or individual, but actually we only want Google or any other search engine to index the root URL. It may be faceted, the URL, with query string and, red, yellow, and blue or whatever. And you don't want Google indexing that one. You want Google indexing the root. And it also does some interesting things with link value, but it's outside of the scope of this webinar. However, it is important to realize that canonicalization is important, especially for retail sites where it is possible to accidentally create duplicate content. Site architecture, which I've already mentioned, is important for both spiders and people. And a lot of this that is good SEO is not just good for spiders, it's good for people. And so it's always best to keep people in mind first, and then the SEO will follow. A good site architecture can help people find relevant products or information. Plus, it can help form the foundation of a good breadcrumb trail. And what does that mean? We can also mark it up with schema. And good breadcrumb trails help Google understand entity relationships for pages to topics as well. So we want to make sure we're helping Google, but we're also helping users at the same time. And schema.org is the best place to find out what schema can be used to mark up your website. Again, it's a technical issue, and there is a lot of schema out there, but there is no such thing at all as too much schema on a page, unless, of course, you're a developer, in which case, if you have to implement it, there can feel like there is such a thing as too much schema. And I understand that. One of the other technical things that you can affect, it's a little bit more difficult. So I've gone from easy to moderate to difficult here, which is site speed and core web vitals. Now, the reason this is more complex is site speed is something that sometimes requires more development time in order to affect. It's not just about getting green on Lighthouse or something like that. Lighthouse is a tool that is freely available in Chrome. It's also about making sure that the site is faster for people. If Amazon finds improvements in sales over fractions of a second improvement, your website will find improvements in revenue if you just speed it up sometimes. So people like sites that are speedy. Google likes sites that are speedy. Thus, you should be doing a fast site. Also, core web vitals, things like cumulative layout shift. When image sizes are not defined, when their parameters are not defined, then it can jump around. And I just was on a website like that today. I kept having to scroll because the text kept jumping, because the images kept loading. It was awful. It really was a poor user experience. And that's what Google wants to avoid sending people to, is a poor user experience. So that's why core web vitals and site speed are so important. Of course, the content of your website is important too. We can't ignore that. The content of your website is what forms the foundation of how you rank. It does include metadata, and it is crucial to get this correct in order to address searcher needs, which we've already seen. And that usually, but not always, leads to ranking better on a search engine. It is much, much better to optimize the content that is within your control than it is to gain high quality links. Honestly, it is so much better to adjust your content, to optimize your title tags, because keywords and title tags count. It's much better to do things you can control than things you can't. But you also have to demonstrate to somebody like Google that you deserve to rank. How do you do that? Well, EAT. It's not just about eating chocolate. It's also about expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And how do we know this is important to Google? They mention it in their Quality Raters guidelines. These are publicly available, and you can access them if you check the document that goes with this webinar, which has a link to them. However, there are also many websites that have given their sort of interpretation of these Quality Rater guidelines and what EAT actually means. Expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness are difficult, but in some ways easy. T, trustworthiness, is the easiest one. What's Google looking for? Privacy policy, your address, your phone number, your email address, those sorts of things being easily available for a user. I was on a website the other day. It had nothing. It had a form I could fill in, but no address, no email address I could email, no phone number I could call, nothing. It had hidden its registration details. I had no way of knowing where that was. Was it registered in Puerto Rico? Was it registered in Spain? Was it registered in Australia? I don't know. All I knew was there was a form and that was it. And that's not part of being trustworthy. So things you can affect, T. E and A are a little bit more difficult. They are about links. They're about citations as well, which is being mentioned without a link. So a little bit more difficult to affect and a little bit more involved. And there are plenty of guides online about this. Technical elements are difficult to affect. I've written an entire guide that was huge, could have been a book on it. So honestly, it's not an easy topic to get into. So that's why there are so many other websites out there that will cover this for you. Now, metadata, I have mentioned, and it is easier. So title tags and meta descriptions are very important for ranking. Title tags, I've mentioned, can change the ranking of your website, but do not just stuff your title tag with keywords. That doesn't work anymore. And if it looks spammy, people will not click on it. The meta description is also part of what we use, well, what any website uses to encourage people to click. It's your advert. Think about it. It's your advert in Google. Now, sometimes Google changes your advert, and that's a little bit frustrating, but it's important to get it right because Google won't change it if you get it right. So look at what other people are doing. Don't copy, be inspired by, and do one better. So metadata is important, but what keywords you're putting in there is important. Obviously, we want a topic to a page, so we want to do our keyword research and understand what those topics could be. So we want to use keywords that relate to the topic itself, that have search volume, and that are the right words to rank for. We don't want to rank for the wrong stuff. Leads to bad user experience, and we don't want that. The keywords must be naturally worked into content. Really, honestly, there is no reason to just keyword stuff. There's no such thing as a best keyword density. You have to mention the keyword once, but then just write naturally. Word count specifics should be ignored. People who say that there is this keyword density or an absolutely minimum number of words that you have to have on a page are just fooling themselves and you. They're trying to stand out for the wrong reasons. Ignore them. Write what's natural. Write to the natural length. Do not go over, but also don't be too simple. You want to make sure you're covering the topic well. So if you're writing about are scented candles toxic, you really don't want to be too light on that. But also you want to make sure that other people cite you and other people mention you in order to make sure that you create almost a buzz about your article because you want to become an authority about whether scented candles are toxic or not. But it can also be about like the 13 best candles to have in your bathroom. So maybe we want the featured snippet. And I know that sometimes it does seem like only newspapers get them. But honestly, I have an e-commerce client. He's in the toys area, toys for kids, and he does get featured snippets all the time. And what we do is we use SEMrush again. I know other tools are available, but in SEMrush, what I can do is I can look at the keywords that the site is ranking for, and I can look for where we have a featured snippet and where we don't. But the search result does have a featured snippet. And then there's a great deck and article online by AJ Gerkich and SEMrush about what you need to do to optimize for featured snippets. There were millions of web pages analyzed. They came up with some guidelines based on what their analysis showed them. So, if you want to appear, you have to deliver the content that is expected. But also you have to be trusted and you have to be an authority. And the best way to do that is also link building. However, the best links are not paid for or exchanged for. Rather, they are earned. They're given by choice. And SEOs should be building links to benefit people, not search engines. And the links should deliver on business objectives. I have bought links, yes. Well, what I've done is I have compensated bloggers for the day that they took to spend researching and writing an article that complemented some research that we had done as the client. I've also had it where they've spent a day to write an article about a topic that they themselves felt passionate about, but was relevant to the client. Now, if they're spending a day doing the research, I want to compensate them for their time, but also they've spent time building up their audience. Why shouldn't I be giving them some sort of compensation to access their audience? I know that makes it more of an advertorial. And yes, if you are paying for that content, you do need to make sure they're disclosing it. And I have decks about that elsewhere. But if you're going to build links, I've made money off of links. And that's the way you want to go. Why? Because the link was in the right content, on the right site, accessing the right audience. And that audience bought. And that's what's important. So build links by designing good content that people want to link to. You can use listicles. In this case, I love this agency's work. It's an article where the topic is fun and informative, but it's not too heavy. They've used images here and also tried to complement with interesting snippets of information about the saying and the country it comes from. But really, you want to be creating content that is either in-depth or is fun and light, that is deeply researched or has some information that people couldn't find elsewhere. And especially journalists, they're really interested in information that cannot be found elsewhere. If you use Google's dataset search, you can actually find a lot of data and then spin the data in a new and interesting way that hasn't been seen before. And you can use that and reach it out to journalists. They will be interested. But the key is you have to build relationships through that outreach. So you want to make sure that you're not just saying, hey, you're from the Telegraph, you should link to us. Or, hey, you're from the Washington Post, you should link to us. No, you want to be thinking about, hey, you're writing about language and quirks of language. I've written this, or I've worked on this article about really weird, quirky idioms from around the world that were kind of fun, and we created images for them. And I would absolutely love it if this was relevant for you. If you could work with me, we can create some visuals for your website to help it make it more compelling for your audience to want to read more about these idioms. So you want to build that relationship and talk to them about how you can be mutually beneficial, not exchanging links, but actually helping them with content for their site, and they're then creating that relationship so they'll link back to you. It's all about keywords. It's all about research. It's all about outreach. And it's all about building content that people want to relate to, that people want to read, that people want to share on a Friday afternoon when they're tired and burnt out a little bit, but they want a little bit of pick-me-up, so they share your content. And even though a link on social media might not count for much, it could count for sales. So we want to make sure that we're going up and we never stop. We're always optimizing, always researching keywords, always doing that little bit more. I would recommend books, Everybody Lies by Seth Stevens-Davidovitz, and the book Contagious, which will help you write better, compelling content that people will want to share, because it breaks down how to create content that people will want to share right from the beginning, when it talks about the most expensive Philly cheesesteak sandwich in the world. Thank you very much for sticking with it. Hopefully you've also got the accompanying guide. If you have any more questions, the people who organize these webinars are amazing, but you can also reach me on Twitter and ask me a question. Generally, I would ask you to be respectful of my time, but go in, dig into my SlideShare. Don't ask me how to do X, Y, and Z, because I might not be able to answer it, but I can point you in the direction of somebody who can help you to discover more about how you can do more for your website. The people who organize these webinar events, though, are ready and waiting to answer your questions. So get in contact with them, tweet me and ask me if you need to find somebody local to you, because I've got lots of contacts. Dig into my slides, and thank you very much for sticking with it.